Curiosity clung to the air like the drifting winter snow the morning Evie Hartwell was escorted toward the chapel doors, her steps small, hesitant, and far too quiet for a girl barely 18. People gathered along the wooden walkway not to celebrate but to witness, to gossip, to measure the worth of a young woman traded by her father's debts. The town had waited days for this moment, whispering rumors that stirred like restless winds. What kind of man forces a girl into marriage? What kind of girl agrees? And what kind of life waited beyond this day? Evie felt those stares scraping across her skin as she moved, her breath trembling in the cold. The snowfall softened the world around her but could not soften the truth of what she was walking into. She had grown up learning how to be small, how to fold herself inward so less of her could be hurt. Today, even the delicate beauty that others praised felt like a burden. She wished she could hide it beneath the falling snow, disappear into the quiet white and never be found. Wyatt Maddox, the man she was to marry, stood near the chapel steps, a tall figure carved from the same silence that cloaked the mountains he called home. 35, wealthy, and feared by nearly everyone who whispered his name, he seemed more legend than man. His coat, heavy with frost, made him look like he had stepped directly out of some untamed wilderness. Evie had imagined him 1,000 different ways in the restless nights before this one, but none of those imagined versions felt as real, or as unreadable, as the man waiting for her now. He watched her approach without judgment, but also without softness. His gaze was steady, his shoulders still, his presence undeniably powerful. She could not tell whether he pitied her, tolerated her, or simply accepted what fate had arranged. Yet even as she trembled beneath the weight of her disadvantage, a strange curiosity flickered briefly in her chest. Why did a man like him agree to this marriage? What need did someone with so much land, so much money, so much strength have for a girl who possessed so little choice? Wyatt lowered his head in a small nod as she reached the top step. Snow fell between them, settling lightly on his dark hair. Without speaking, he opened his heavy coat and draped it around her shoulders. The gesture was simple, almost instinctive, but it startled her more than if he had uttered some grand, rehearsed vow. She felt the warmth of his body lingering on the fabric, and for a heartbeat, her fear paused, just long enough for her to wonder if the stories about him failed to tell the whole truth. The crowd hushed as they moved inside the chapel. The flickering candlelight cast wavering shadows across the wooden pews, shadows that seemed to lean closer with every step she took. She could almost hear judgment breathing from them. Sheriff Amos Clay stood near the back, his stern eyes following every movement. Martha Ellery, the seamstress who had hemmed her dress in silence 2 nights before, pressed a hand to her chest, offering the only sympathetic expression in the room. Evie's hands shook as she stood beside Wyatt, her fingers cold even through the thin gloves. The preacher spoke, but his words floated around her like distant echoes. She kept her gaze fixed on the floor, terrified that meeting Wyatt's eyes might collapse whatever fragile resolve she had left. Her father's absence lingered heavily. He had left the moment the papers were signed. She felt discarded, yet bound, trapped between past betrayal and future uncertainty. Wyatt's voice broke through that fog of fear when he spoke his vow. It was low, steady, and unadorned by sentiment, but something about the way he said her name, like he intended to pronounce it correctly, every time, pulled her upward from the depths of her trembling. When it was her turn to speak, her voice nearly cracked. She pushed the words out as if they weighed more than her own small body. The ceremony ended with an uncomfortable stillness, the kind that lingers after something irreversible has happened. The town waited, hungry for the next moment, expecting Wyatt to claim his bride with authority or display some mark of ownership that matched the rumors of his dominating nature. Instead, Wyatt reached into his coat, withdrew a small wooden box, and placed it gently in Evie's hands. She paused, uncertain, before lifting the lid. Gasps rippled instantly through the chapel. Inside was a land deed, signed, sealed, and bearing her name as sole owner. A cabin, a stretch of meadow, and a piece of quiet earth were hers alone, granted without condition or expectation. Evie's breath caught. Her heart thudded, loud enough she wondered if anyone else could hear it. She looked at Wyatt for the first time that morning, truly looked. His expression did not demand gratitude, it did not seek admiration. He simply nodded, as though offering a truth he hoped she would someday understand. "No one owns you now," he murmured, just loud enough for her to hear, yet soft enough that the moment felt meant only for them. The chapel fell silent, not out of respect, but disbelief. The town had expected a transaction, a display of male power. Instead, they witnessed something they could not neatly gossip about, a man giving a young bride not chains, but freedom. Even the preacher seemed momentarily unsure what to say. Evie closed the box, her fingers resting against the smooth wood. Her heartbeat slowed, settling into something unfamiliar, an emotion she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. Not trust, not hope. Something smaller, quieter. Possibility. Wyatt extended his arm, not to claim her, but to guide her toward the door. Outside, the snow had thickened, coating the world in soft white. The town parted as they stepped out, creating a path that felt more like an uncertain future than a departure. Evie hesitated on the last step, glancing once over her shoulder at the watching faces, faces that had defined her value for so long. She felt the wooden box warm beneath her fingers, a steady reminder that her life no longer belonged to them. Wyatt waited beside his horse, patient, silent, but not unkind. Evie drew a slow breath and stepped forward, her fear still present but no longer the only thing she carried. And with that first deliberate step toward him, curiosity turned into the faintest flicker of courage, just enough to pull the reader onward, toward whatever waited in the mountains beyond. The climb toward Wyatt's cabin wound through a forest draped in white, the trees standing like quiet sentinels as Evie rode beside the man she barely knew. The air smelled of pine and cold stone, sharp but clean, and every breath she drew felt different from the breaths she had taken in town, wider, less trapped. She kept glancing at Wyatt, studying the rigid line of his shoulders, the way he guided his horse with calm precision. He did not glance back, and yet she sensed a careful awareness in him, as if he was giving her space to settle, to think, to simply be. Curiosity still gnawed at her, but now it was softened by the lingering warmth of his unexpected gift. When the cabin finally appeared, tucked against a rise of rock and framed by towering firs, she felt a small flutter of relief. It was modest but sturdy, with smoke drifting from the chimney in a gentle curl. Wyatt dismounted and held his hand out, not commanding, just offering. Evie placed her fingers in his palm, surprised again by the warmth of his touch and the restraint in his grip. He steadied her, stepped back, and let her walk ahead of him into the life awaiting her beyond the threshold. Inside, the cabin was warmer than she expected, lit by a gentle fire that glowed against the wooden walls. The scent of burning cedar wrapped around her, soothing in a way she had never experienced. A simple table, 2 chairs, shelves lined with tools and tins, each piece placed with quiet purpose. Wyatt removed his gloves and set them near the hearth before stepping aside as though he wanted her to claim the space first. Evie stood still, absorbing everything, her heartbeat slowly untangling itself from fear. Wyatt eventually broke the silence with a low, steady voice that seemed to choose its words carefully. "There's a room for you," he said, motioning to a small doorway. "You can arrange it how you like." She nodded, her throat too tight to speak. The idea that she was allowed preferences, allowed a space of her own, felt almost foreign. He busied himself with practical tasks. He checked the fire, filled the kettle, and placed a tin cup near her hand without looking directly at her, as though he didn't want to overwhelm her with his presence. She watched him work, noticing the precision in his movements, the gentleness hidden beneath layers of silence. The rumors from town echoed faintly in her mind, but each passing moment chipped away at their sharp edges. Wyatt Maddox, feared by so many, moved with a kind of deliberate softness she had not expected. Days passed in a rhythm she gradually learned to trust. Wyatt rose early, splitting wood with unhurried strength or tending to the animals outside. He rarely asked anything of her, never questioned her movements, and always knocked softly before entering her room, small gestures that stitched tiny seams of safety into her nervous spirit. She began making quiet contributions of her own, sweeping the floor, warming water for tea, sewing small curtains from fabric Martha Ellery had given her as a parting kindness. Wyatt noticed each change but didn't comment. Sometimes she would catch his gaze lingering a little longer as she moved through the cabin, and something unspoken flickered behind his steady eyes. Yet silence, even gentle silence, has its shadows. Evie often wondered what he wanted from this marriage. He had given her land, shelter, and a freedom she had never known. But why? What did a man like him hope to receive in return? One evening, she found the courage to ask. They sat at the table with the fire crackling softly behind them. She forced her fingers to still and lifted her gaze. "Why did you marry me, Wyatt?" she asked quietly. His jaw tightened slightly, not in irritation but in uncertainty. He set his cup down with care, keeping his eyes on the table before meeting hers. "Your father came to me. He said you deserved more than what he could give. I don't know if he believed it, but I did." He paused, searching for precise words. "I wanted a home with someone who didn't fear the quiet. Someone who might understand it. I didn't expect you to be grateful. I only hoped you'd be safe." Something inside her loosened, like a knot pulling free. It wasn't love yet, not fully, but it was something that felt like the first step toward it. Their fragile peace, however, trembled one afternoon when Wyatt sent her down the mountain with him for supplies. The storm clouds promised trouble, but Evie insisted she could manage the ride. She wanted to prove she belonged here, that she wasn't just a girl waiting for life to happen around her. In town, the whispers followed her instantly. The same men and women who had watched her wedding now wore expressions sharpened by curiosity, jealousy, or suspicion. A group near the general store murmured loud enough for her to hear. Accusations that she had trapped Wyatt, that she was after his fortune, that a girl with her beauty could manipulate a man into anything. The shame seared through her like sudden fire, reopening wounds she thought she had left behind. Wyatt stepped forward as if to shield her from the sting of their words, but she placed a trembling hand on his arm, silently asking to face this herself. Her voice shook as she spoke, but she did not back down. "I didn't trap anyone. Wyatt gave me land so I'd never be owned again. He showed me more kindness in a week than most of you have shown me in a lifetime." Her words fell into the room with unexpected weight. Wyatt's voice followed, low and unwavering. "Judge her again, and you judge me. And I won't stand for it." The store fell silent. Even those who loved gossip knew when a line had been drawn. Evie's breath steadied. For the first time, she felt herself standing beside Wyatt as something closer to an equal, a partner, a woman who had found her own spine and spoken her truth. The ride back up the mountain felt different than the ride down. Snow fell thicker, gentler, like a blessing more than a burden. Evie found herself studying Wyatt's profile, noticing the quiet concern etched into his brow. She reached for his hand before she could second-guess the impulse. He looked at her, surprised but softened, and their fingers intertwined, a slow, sure acceptance rather than a claim. Back at the cabin, the warmth embraced them as if welcoming them home. Evie stepped inside first, knowing with sudden certainty that she wanted to build a life here, not because she was forced to, but because something in this quiet world fit the shape of her spirit. Wyatt closed the door behind them, shutting out the storm. Evie turned toward him, her voice gentle but certain. "I'm not afraid of the quiet," she whispered. A rare smile tugged at his mouth. "Then you'll do just fine here." And in that simple exchange, with snow drifting softly outside and warmth settling deep within, their unlikely marriage began to bloom into the kind of love that grows slowly, steadily, like firewood stacked against winter, waiting patiently to burn bright.